The nugget that changed everything. The morning I found that gold nugget under my cabin floorboards, I thought I'd won the lottery. By sunset, I was fighting for my life against the very people I'd called friends. It started when I was fixing a loose board in my one-room cabin just outside Deadwood. The wood had been creaking for weeks, driving me half crazy every time I walked across it. So, I decided to pry it up with my knife, thinking I'd find rotted wood or maybe a dead rat. Instead, there was a nugget the size of a chicken egg, gleaming like a piece of the sun had fallen through my floor. My hand shook as I picked it up. The weight felt impossibly heavy for something so small. I've been breaking my back in the silver mines for 3 years, barely scraping together enough coin for beans and coffee. And here was more money than I'd seen in my entire life, sitting right under my feet. I thought to myself, this changes everything. No more 12-hour shifts underground. No more eating stale bread for dinner. But just as I let the thought settle in, I heard Jake's voice outside my door. Jake Wilson was my mining partner and the closest thing to family I had in this godforsaken town. We'd shared our last dollar more times than I could count. If anyone deserved to know about this discovery, it was him. I shoved the nugget into my pocket just as Jake pushed through my door without knocking like he always did. He was grinning, his face still black with mine dust. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every few minutes, I'd catch myself touching my pocket where I'd hidden the nugget wrapped in an old cloth. At the mine, Jake kept shooting me sideways glances. "You've been acting strange since yesterday," he said. "Something happened at your place?" The words hung between us, too heavy to ignore, but I didn't want to share my secret. Not yet. I was barely dressed when I heard voices outside my window. Multiple voices. Angry ones. I peered through the dirty glass, my stomach dropping when I saw Jake standing in the street with 5 other miners, all of them staring directly at my cabin. My hands trembled as I strained to hear. "I'm telling you, something's not right with Tom." Jake's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "I've been found out." I stayed away from the windows, but I could hear the conversation outside clearly. Yesterday, he was acting like a man with a secret. Jake's voice carried the accusation, and I could feel my chest tighten. Every word cut deeper, a wound I hadn't even realized was there. "A big one," Red Murphy added, his voice like gravel scraping against the earth. "What kind of secret?" Samuel Hayes, the banker, asked, suspicion hanging in the air like a thick fog. I could barely breathe as the conversation turned my way, and with every word they spoke, the net tightened. They were all suspicious now. They knew something was wrong, and they were starting to piece it together. I hadn't been careful enough. Martha Wells, the general store owner, added in a sharp voice, the kind of secret that makes a man lie to his best friend and start talking about leaving town sudden-like. The weight of those words hit me like a physical blow. It was Jake who had started to suspect, but now everyone in town was putting it together. I couldn't run anymore. The thought of telling them the truth crossed my mind, but I knew better than to believe it would stop the bloodlust now in their eyes. I was no longer just the miner Tom Miller. I was a target, and the nugget, that gold, was the reason they all turned against me. The mob outside my door had grown. It wasn't just my friends anymore. The voices had gone from suspicion to outright ownership. If Tom Miller struck gold on that claim, Jake's voice boomed, filled with rage, then half of it belongs to me by rights. We've been partners for 3 years. I've got as much claim to whatever he found as he does. The betrayal in his eyes was like a punch to the gut. My best friend had turned into a man who believed he was owed what wasn't his. What hurt more was that I could see the same twisted logic in the faces of the others, like Samuel Hayes and Red Murphy, who all suddenly thought they had some right to my discovery. "Hell, if there's gold in these hills," Red Murphy growled, "we all deserve a piece." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They were predators circling in for the kill. And then Samuel Hayes added, "Tom's been using tools from my hardware credit." That nugget was found with my equipment. A sickening realization crawled up my spine. This wasn't just about the gold anymore. It was about claiming me, owning me, and tearing apart everything I thought was mine. I didn't know how long I'd been standing there, but my throat was dry, and the air felt thick with tension. I felt cornered in my own cabin, with nowhere to run. I could hear the chatter growing louder outside, their voices like a storm building. The men were no longer just asking. They were demanding. "Tom Miller, we know you're in there," Jake called, his voice full of something I couldn't identify. "Come out, and let's talk like civilized men." It was no longer a suggestion. It was a command. I gripped my rifle tighter, the barrel pressing into my palms. "There's nothing to talk about, Jake. You're trespassing on my property." The response was a loud laugh, a mocking sound that rang in my ears like a warning bell. "Your property," Samuel Hayes scoffed. "You're 2 weeks behind on your land payments, boy. This place belongs to the bank now." I hadn't thought about that. I was so fixated on the Nugget that I'd forgotten my dues, forgotten my position in the town. I was a squatter on borrowed time, with nothing but the gold to my name. The situation escalated fast. The door splintered with a crashing blow. I was about to face the mob that had once been my friends, but now they were armed, hungry, and angry. Jake stormed in first, his bloody face contorted with rage, followed by Red Murphy and 3 other miners. Their eyes gleamed with the same hunger I had seen in a dozen men chasing gold. "Where is it, Tom?" Jake demanded, the pistol aimed at my chest. "Where's the gold?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The weight of the gold in my pocket was unbearable, heavier now than ever before. It was the thing that had destroyed everything. "Where's the gold, Tom?" Jake's voice cracked, more desperate now. I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking and the doubt gnawed at me like a poison. I was caught in the crossfire between them, my former friends, and the truth about what the gold had done to Deadwood. "Get out of my home, Jake." I mean it. My words were hoarse, but I knew they wouldn't listen. "You're home." Red Murphy sneered, stepping forward. "This place belongs to all of us now." Then came the demand. "Strip search him, Red, and tear this place apart, board by board." The voices outside grew louder, and I realized what had been happening. The mob wasn't just angry. They were desperate. I realized then, the gold hadn't just cost me my friends. It had cost me my life. There would be no reasoning, no more partnership. There would only be survival, and the price of that survival would be higher than I could afford. I barely had time to react. In one fluid motion, Jake lunged toward me, grabbing for my rifle. I swung it in his direction, and the crack of the stock against his jaw rang out, echoing through the cabin. Jake stumbled backward, blood streaming from his mouth, and crashed into Red Murphy. "Kill him," Jake screamed, his voice thick with blood and fury. The greedy bastard attacked me. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a full-on brawl, a desperate scramble for the gold and for survival. Red Murphy, furious, was the first to raise his shotgun. In a flash, he aimed it at me, but I had already backed into a corner, my rifle now the only thing between me and the mob. As the chaos unfolded, I could see that there was no more reasoning with these people. Their eyes were wild with greed, and their thirst for gold had turned them into something else entirely, savages. They weren't just fighting for gold anymore. They were fighting for control, for ownership of everything I had, and in some twisted way, that included me. I had to make my choice, fight for my life or hand over the gold and hope they let me walk away. But I knew the truth. Even if I gave them the Nugget, they wouldn't let me live. They couldn't afford to. I had seen too much. They knew too much. Dead men tell no tales. The situation grew worse with every passing second. Jake's bloodshot eyes locked onto mine, his anger only escalating. My finger hovered over the trigger, but I was paralyzed by the violence I had unleashed. Every man in that room was a threat, and there was no clear way out. I had a choice to make, but it didn't feel like a choice at all. Suddenly, a crash from outside shattered my thoughts. A gunshot rang through the air, followed by Martha Wells's screams. "Help! Someone help me!" The bank. They were robbing the bank. My stomach twisted. While I had been running from the truth and hiding my gold, the town had fallen apart. The town that had once been a community was now on the verge of complete lawlessness. People I knew were now involved in the same desperate fight for survival that I was. Jake's voice cut through my panic. He's the one who started this mess. He's the reason people are dying in the streets. The weight of his words hit me like a freight train. What had I done? I had unleashed chaos, and now it was spreading faster than I could control it. The gold, which had once seemed like a blessing, had become the curse of Deadwood, and it wasn't just the men in front of me who would suffer. The entire town would burn because of it. The time for talking was over. My options were dwindling with every passing minute. The men outside were closing in. I could hear them, their footsteps getting closer. My heart raced, knowing I had to act fast. I shoved the rifle into Jake's chest and looked him dead in the eyes. "I won't give it to you," I said, the words bitter in my mouth. "I won't be part of this madness." But there was no time for anything else. The door splintered as the mob stormed in, and my rifle was wrenched from my hands. In the chaos, I heard them yelling, but I couldn't focus on their words. My thoughts were consumed by the gold in my pocket, the very thing that had torn my world apart. I made a split-second decision. I grabbed the nugget from my pocket, my fingers trembling as I held it up high. The gold glinted in the dim light, catching the eyes of every man in the room. "Take it," I shouted, my voice hoarse with the weight of everything I had lost. "Take it and leave me be." For a moment, everything stopped. The shouting, the fighting, the desperation, it all froze as they stared at the gold in my hand. And then, the chaos erupted again. It was like I had thrown a match into a powder keg. The sound of gunfire filled the cabin, and men started falling. I watched in horror as Red Murphy went down first, his body crumpling to the floor with a shotgun blast his chest. But it didn't stop there. One by one, the others fell, each man consumed by the greed that had driven them into this madness. The moment I had feared had arrived. There was no escape. The gold had already torn Deadwood apart, and now was consuming everything in its path. As I climbed out of the back window, I heard the cries of the men who had once been my neighbors, my friends. But they were no longer the people I had known. They had become something else entirely. I made it into the creek bed, my breath coming in short, painful gasps. Behind me, the chaos of the fight continued, the gunshots echoing in the distance. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I had made my choice. I had thrown the nugget to the wolves, and now I was just trying to survive. But the damage was done. Deadwood was lost, and so was I. The sound of footsteps echoed behind me. The shouts, the cries, everything had merged into a dull roar. I couldn't outrun them. I had made it this far, but they were closing in. The canyon walls rose higher and higher, trapping me in their grip. I could see the silhouettes of men ahead of me, their rifles raised, their intentions clear. There was no escape. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. New voices. The mob had doubled, maybe tripled in size. I was surrounded. The game was over. I had one last chance to face the consequences of my greed and betrayal, or to make a stand, even if it meant dying in this godforsaken canyon. Certainly, I'll expand the script by enriching the scenes, enhancing the emotional tension, and deepening the moral conflict in the narrative. I'll weave in additional moments of introspection, sensory detail, and more dialogue to further immerse the reader in Tom's internal struggle and the escalating violence around him. Here's the expanded version of the story. I pressed myself against the rocky wall of Dead Horse Canyon, hoping the darkness would shield me long enough to think of something, anything, that could get me out alive. The mob at the mouth of the canyon was huge, far too many for me to face head-on. I had nothing left to fight for, not even the gold. The sound of the mob's voices grew louder, their determination to catch me unyielding. But the truth was, I couldn't run anymore. There was no place left to hide. I had one final choice: either face them down and hope I could make it out, or surrender and let the town finish tearing itself apart. Either way, I was trapped in the mess I had created. "Tom, we know you're up there." Jake's voice was loud, cutting through the canyon walls. "You've got nowhere left to run. Come down and let's settle this like men." Settle this? I thought. There was no settling anymore. The moment I had found that cursed nugget, everything had already been decided. This wasn't about the gold anymore. It was about survival, about the choices we all make when greed enters the picture, when everything you thought was good in this world falls apart. But it didn't matter. They were coming. I could feel their eyes on me, hungry for what I had. Every one of them was convinced that they were entitled to the gold, that it was their right to take it from me, no matter the cost. I squeezed my hand around the rifle, my knuckles aching from the tension. As I sat there, I couldn't help but remember how easy everything had seemed when I first found the nugget. The weight of it in my hand, the hope of freedom it had promised, all the possibilities that had flooded my mind like a river in the spring. But those thoughts felt like a lifetime ago. Now, the only thing that mattered was getting out of this hellhole alive, even if it meant abandoning everything I thought I valued. A cold gust of wind whistled through the canyon, and I shivered, though the night was warm. My mind was a blur, each thought spinning in circles as I listened to the voices from below. I could hear Jake's voice rise above the rest, angry, demanding. The others shouted in agreement. They were coming for me, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. "Tom!" Jake shouted again, his voice carrying an edge that I hadn't heard before. "You betrayed us all. You think you can just run away with the gold and leave us to rot? We trusted you, partner." My heart tightened at the word partner, but I pushed it down. I didn't have time for guilt. I had to survive. I heard the snap of a twig underfoot, followed by the sound of boots crunching through dry leaves. The mob was close, closing in from both sides. The canyon was narrow, and the path forward was blocked by rocks too steep to climb. The only escape route was behind me, the way I had come, but they had already surrounded me. I was trapped. I couldn't outrun them. I had no more tricks up my sleeve. But as the voices drew nearer, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to die a coward. I wasn't going to let them make me their scapegoat. If I was going to die, I was going to make sure they knew the truth. I pulled out the nugget, holding it up for everyone to see. It gleamed in the moonlight, a silent invitation for every last man to stake his claim. "You want this?" I shouted, my voice breaking through the noise of the crowd. "Come and get it." The mob hesitated for a split second, as if my words had caused them to pause and consider the weight of their actions. But then, just as I had expected, chaos broke loose. A man from the back of the crowd lunged forward, and another followed. They fought like animals, each one pushing the others aside to get to the gold. The sound of gunfire rang through the air as everyone opened fire, their desperation turning deadly. I used the distraction to move fast, my legs burning as I scrambled toward a small rock outcrop. It was my only chance to escape, but I couldn't stop myself from looking back. The sight of my old friend, Jake, now caught in the madness, turned my stomach. His face was twisted with rage, and in that moment, I saw the man I once called a partner as nothing more than another pawn in this wretched game of survival. The gold was the catalyst, but the greed that fueled these men had been there all along, buried deep within their souls. Deadwood was nothing more than a powder keg, and I had lit the match. The gunshots rang out louder now, cutting through the air like the thunder that preceded a storm. The night was alive with the violence of men driven mad by gold. I could hear the angry shouting of the men, but it was muffled by the deafening roar of the gunfire. Each shot, each scream, was another thread in the tapestry of destruction I had unwittingly woven. I thought I heard a voice calling my name, Jake's voice, but it was drowned out by the chaos. I didn't care anymore. I wasn't going to stop and try to explain. There was nothing to explain. These men had chosen their path, and now it was a path of violence, of madness. They wanted the gold, and they would tear the town apart to get it. I didn't look back again. I kept moving, my heart hammering in my chest, the weight of a nugget in my pocket heavier than I could bear. I ran. There was no more thought in it, just the pounding of my heart, the adrenaline pumping through my veins, and the sound of my boots hitting the rocky floor of Dead Horse Canyon. Behind me, the shots grew more frantic. The voices became muffled by the chaos. I wasn't sure if I was running toward freedom or into more danger, but it didn't matter anymore. Every step was a gamble. Every breath a risk. But then, as I reached the canyon mouth, I saw something that stopped me cold. Light. the faint glow of the town in the distance. The fires were still burning, the smoke swirling into the sky like the final remnants of a dying town. It wasn't just deadwood that was crumbling. It was the very heart of civilization, torn apart by greed, by the gold I had found. The sound of men shouting behind me grew louder, but I didn't stop. I kept running, my legs aching, my mind screaming at me to keep going. I thought I heard Jay calling my name, but I wasn't sure. His voice was just one in a sea of many, all of them fueled by the same thing. Desperation, greed, betrayal. But I wasn't going back. I couldn't. As I reached the outskirts of Deadwood, the town I had once called home, I turned back one final time. The fires still burned, the town slowly dying in the distance. I felt something cold settle in my chest as I watched it. Deadwood was gone, and I had been the one to pull the trigger. It didn't matter that the gold was gone, lost to the madness that had overtaken the canyon. It didn't matter that I had escaped with my life. What mattered was that I had lost everything that had ever meant anything to me. The faces of my friends, my neighbors, they were gone, consumed by the same greed that had consumed me. I looked down at the nugget, now nothing but a memory. The weight of it in my pocket had been a burden from the moment I found it. And now, I realized that I had been running from my past, from the man I had been, and into a future that would forever be marked by the choices I had made. I didn't look back again. 3 months later, I found myself in a silver mine outside Denver. I was just another drifter, working for a wage and keeping my head down. No one knew my name, no one knew who I had been. And that's the way I wanted it. But sometimes the past catches up with you. Sometimes the weight of what you've done is too much to carry. And as I stood there, staring at the mountains in the distance, I realized that no matter where I went, I would never be free of Deadwood. The nugget was gone, and with it, the town. But the lesson I learned would stay with me for the rest of my life. Gold might make you rich, but it will always make you poor in the end. Greed takes everything. Some things are better left buried, and some secrets are too dangerous for any man to uncover.